behind us, that would be a wonderful first step in committing to a deeper understanding and more profound understanding of Indigenous literatures in general. So to start with, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Today we have with us Tasha Spillet. Tasha is an educator, a poet, a graphic novelist, a scholar. She is of Cree and Trinidadian ancestry and currently working on her PhD in education. Welcome, Tasha, and I know that in terms of education that you have some very interesting areas of interest that I believe spill over into your work. So I'm going to come back to you in a moment, but I'd like to just introduce everyone off the top so we all know who our speakers are today. We also have with us, I'm really happy to say, we have Natasha Donnovan. Natasha is an illustrator from the De La Ronde and Morin Métis families from Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan. She's a well-known illustrator, has worked on numerous projects, including This Place, 150 Years Retold, which we'll be focusing on this evening at our event. Her work has also appeared in The Other Side anthology, and Wonderful Women of History, which was published by DC, which is something that I'm really keen to chat with Natasha about. So welcome, Natasha. It's really wonderful to meet you, if only virtually, and to get this opportunity to speak with you. We also have with us Neal Shannacappo. Neal is a Nakawe or Soto graphic novelist and poet, an illustrator from Rolling River First Nation in Manitoba. He's Eagle Clan, currently living and working in Ottawa. You can find his stories in Indigenous anthologies, including Sovereign Traces, Volume 1 and Volume 2, as well as he did the illustrations for If I Go Missing, which was published by James Lorimer and Company. He's also just recently released his first graphic novel, The Krillian Key, Volume 1, Salamander Run, with Kegedonce Press. So it's really an exciting time, Neal, with his first book behind him, and I'm sure steadily working on the second one. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to everyone who's here attending and listening. I would like to thank again the sponsors of the event. So thank you so much to the University of Toronto Scarborough, as well as the University of Manitoba. It took a concerted effort from a few of us to put this event together. So I'm going to start, I'll start with you first, Tasha, if that's okay.
Sure.
Hi, first of all. So great to meet you. Unfortunately, it's virtual for now, but hopefully in the future, we'll be able to meet in person. It was wonderful to see your little one with you earlier. And I know you have some family responsibilities, so I want to get an opportunity to speak with you off the top. Can you, to start with, just tell us a little bit about your Surviving the City series and your plans for that, and some of the other work that you're doing as a writer?
Sure. So thanks for the organizers for setting this all up. I also just mentioned in the chat to Sean that for some reason my internet seems to be like popping in and out. So if you lose me, I will hopefully be, it says I'm unstable right now. so hopefully I gain stability soon. So Surviving the City, I think I came to graphic novel writing a little bit, maybe not in the usual way. It was actually Negan who reached out to me to ask if I, wanted to write a graphic novel, and made the introduction with Highwater. And then the fantastic women who lead Highwater just sort of said, Tasha, we're happy to have you. What do you want to write? Write whatever you want. And isn't that like kind of like the ideal way to enter into a relationship? And thankfully, from the time I started writing the Surviving the City series and ongoing, they have just, done everything that they could above and beyond to protect the story as I thought it should be told. And I hope that all writers have that experience, but I know that that's not true across the board. So I just want to again recognize the leadership of, of the women who lead Highwater, for just doing what it takes to make sure that writers write in the most authentic way to them and protecting our stories as they move through that editorial process. So I started writing Surviving the City because I truly believe, we're the experts in our own experiences, and the stories that we should tell are the ones that belong to us or that sit deeply in our hearts. And so the story, Surviving the City series, follows the urban Indigenous experience. Like for myself as an urban Indigenous person, that's the story that felt the most authentic to me to tell. And so the characters move through things that myself and my friends moved through as we were in our, our young adult years. And the characters are now growing and figuring out who they are and developing as individuals. I also, I think that I started writing the series with my teacher hat on. So I'm a former classroom teacher. I taught grade 7 through grade 12. I think I heard Neal once reference himself as like a recovering teacher or something. And I identify a little bit with that. So I wrote the graphic novel series thinking about what my students would need for the times that they're in. Because when I was teaching grade 7 through grade 8, grade 7, grade 8, the first graphic novels I set into the hands of young Indigenous readers were David Robertson's graphic novels. And of course, we know David Robertson, like, I don't know how with all his kids he can write so much. He writes a whole bunch. And so I really saw the impact for late or reluctant readers who saw themselves on the page for the first time. That was medicine. It was absolute medicine for those young readers. And I wrote Surviving the City, the series, with them in mind. I wanted, young people to be able to see themselves on the page, to be able to see their community represented in a good way, and also to give them the tools to, move things through their minds and their hearts that we know young people face. And so Surviving the City contends with some pretty tough topics, murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit folks, unsettling the ways that misogyny and homophobia have been internalized in our cultural teachings. These are things that adults aren't ready to look at, but we know that our young people are talking about them, they're seeing them, they're experiencing them. So, as a mother now, I want to ensure that they have the tools to be able to move through those things in the best way possible. And volume number 3 is on the way. My
Fantastic.
editor will know that it's not like existing in physical form yet in the way of a manuscript. But that's the next one. And that one will I wanted to look at anti-Indigenous racism and police brutality. So I think that that's a big one for young people. Lots of young people were really politicized last year around the murder of George Floyd. And of course, we know we have our own homegrown terrorism in that way with the murder of Colton Bushy, the murder here locally of Aisha Hudson by the Winnipeg police. And so these are tough things, and it's tough times to be a young person. We know these things get curated on their social media feeds daily for them, picture after picture of missing people who look like them, murdered people who look like them. And so I think there's space for an artistic avenue for them, to help them move through these things. So that's where the series is at. And I also have you asked for my next project. I have a baby book. I have it right here. So you saw my baby, and here's my baby book. It's called I Sang You Down from the Stars, and it launches in April, and it's published by Little Brown.
Wonderful. And do you have plans for future comics or graphic novels?
I do. I have. I hate talking vaguely about things, but I just spoke yesterday with you know what, so I'll just share because I feel like we're all relatives here. But you know, it was, you know, life is weird sometimes. So like, you know, usually my days are like peeling grapes and changing dirty diapers now. But I actually got contacted by Disney last week. So that's was so unexpected and kind of like, actually my husband and I Googled the person to make sure that I wasn't being punked because it was a little, you know, seemed a little bit odd. So I guess the point is you never know. You know, we have these stories and you never know where they'll lead you. And I don't know if that will lead anywhere, um but I love to write, and there's just an unlimited amount of stories out there, and we just kind of, you know, we reach our hand up and grab the one that's floating by at the time, and we don't know where it will go.
Miigwech, thank you so much. I'm going to come back to you, but I also want to give Natasha an opportunity to just introduce us to her work. So welcome, Natasha. It's wonderful to have you here. Are you here? Sorry, I can't see her at the moment. Oh, there you are. Hi.
I am here.
Maybe having some technical.
Yeah, just a little delay there, Natasha. But you're ready to go when you're.
Okay. Oh.
Okay, I can hear you, but you on my view, frozen.
I'm not sure. Should I introduce myself, or
Go for it.
I'm not sure what's going on your end.
Sorry, I'm not able to
Okay.
hear. Are other people hearing Natasha okay? Because I'm not hearing her.
Yeah, you're just cutting in and out a bit, Natasha. You might try to turn off your video and see if we can hear the audio. We could try that. Yeah,
That seems.
Yeah, Natasha's maybe just saying maybe she should try to phone in just to get a stronger signal there.
Okay, so maybe what we could do is we'll come back to Natasha in a few minutes.
Sure.
How about we give her a few minutes to sort that out, and we'll talk to Neal for a few minutes, and then we'll come back to Natasha. Hopefully we'll have a better connection. So Neal, hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. Yourself?
I'm great, thank you. I'm just, you know, one of those days where I'm just happy to be here. Being able to talk with the three of you is just making my day. So Neal, I just was hoping that you could fill the group in here on some of your work. Just a brief kind of introduction to your work as an illustrator and your work with your new graphic novel series, Krillian Key, and kind of, you know, if there are any specific issues you wanted to raise in terms of how you do your work or why you're doing this kind of work, that would be wonderful to explore as well.
Okay. Thanks for having me. I'm a little nervous, so if I mumble and babble a bit, just bear with me. I'll focus. It's probably why I do illustration and writing. So I got my I started doing graphic novels and comic books when I was a teenager because I had a problem with Superman and Spider-Man and Batman. These guys all have these big, massive superpowers, and they're like, you know. My problem was that they never really showed what they could do as a superhero. So Superman, you'd get into a battle with like the big bad guy of his comic book, and it was building up like 3 or 4 issues, and it would be a 2 or 3 page fight, and thought that was just terrible. You need to show them. So I started creating my own comic books with these big battles, and that's basically all they were. These big, massive battles. And the Kagalgae got started that way as well, where I was just going to write like a 100-page fight scene between everybody, basically. And so I grew up, and my story writing evolved, and the Kagalgae changed throughout the years. And I always thought I was just going to be like a comic book illustrator and work for like DC or Marvel or both, and work on Spider-Man and Superman and stuff like that. That didn't happen. I was approached by National Campus and Community Radio Association, their website of radio, and they asked me to do a biography for a Cree elder that lives in Ottawa, and they wanted me to illustrate it, write it, based on like an interview they had done with him. So I wrote and illustrated Mashkiki Makana, which translates to Medicine Road, which is in Ojibwe, because my mom, she found out on Facebook that I was looking for, asking Crees on my Facebook, hey, how do you say Medicine Road? And she got very mad. She sent me this post, and she said, we're Ojibwe, we speak Ojibwe. And I was like, but I tried to explain to her that it's for book. She said, no, you speak Ojibwe. I was like, okay, so the title's in Ojibwe. So it's about his residential school experience, his first contact residential experience, very heavy. Yeah, it was an emotional, very emotional and spiritually draining book to write and illustrate. After that, I got involved with a couple of Indigenous anthologies, Sovereign Traces volumes 1 and 2. And the first one that I was asked to illustrate was a short story called The Prisoner of Haiku by Gordon Henry. And that was also about residential schools, so it's this really heavy subject, not superhero again. And that was also really hard to illustrate. After that, it was Senator Kim Pate. She asked me to illustrate a book called Mashkawaide, which means to have a strong heart, or has a strong heart. And her idea was that I would create this graphic novel that would change the minds of lawmakers so that they would get rid of mandatory minimums for women, specifically Indigenous women who were convicted of murder or manslaughter, and had to have a certain amount of time before they could be released. So basically what the idea was there was they were all, the women were victims of spousal abuse. So oftentimes women don't survive, or if they do survive, they've had to escape violently. And during those escapes, sometimes their partners die because they're defending themselves in a life or death situation. So I had to illustrate that. I had to create a character that was that you would understand her journey from the beginning and to the end of it, and make sure that she was portrayed as a human being, somebody that you could care about, somebody that you could feel for and understand her plight and how she got out of it, and her decision making in her life. That was really, that was probably one of the hardest ones out of the ones so far that I've talked about that I had to draw. Because you have to show like you have to go into a lot of graphic detail and what she does and how she survives. So, again, not superheroes. I took a break after that. And then I was approached by, actually no, it came up on a Facebook call out for if I go missing, and they were looking for an illustrator. So I put my name out there, and I think like a few months later, I heard back, hey, we want you to be the illustrator. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't think they were going to pick me, but they did. And so I had to, I illustrated If I Go Missing. And again, that was a very painful subject to talk about and to illustrate, because it's about murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And this 14-year-old, or at the time she was 14, and she wrote a letter to Winnipeg police asking to be treated as a non-Indigenous girl, Even though she's proud to be Indigenous, she wanted the police chief to treat her like, you know, a white person, a white girl, and advertised on the newspaper, the television, and, you know, have Amber Alerts, all that kind of stuff, which isn't done for Indigenous kids. So that was both an incredibly powerful experience and also really painful to talk about and to illustrate. And then, thank you. I got approached by Sovereign Traces again to illustrate another short story. This one was about love, and so they had me do a short story called "Linger," which is based off a poem about the kiss that's going to be the most memorable kiss for this woman and this guy, and it would ruin all of the kisses, that kind of thing. So it was a super cheesy short story one, I guess. But it was really lighthearted, and I had a good time writing it and drawing it, so I was happy. And then Kegedonce accepted my proposal to do the Curling Key, and I hadn't worked on the Curling Key like seriously for a number of years because it was this big long thing, and I was still working it out. So a bunch of things happened to me in my life. I moved. I got super sick. I moved again. And then I finally settled in one area, and by this time Kegedonce was asking, "Hey, can we get some copies? Can we get some copies?" And I was like, "Yeah, I don't want to give you what I've got," because I'm looking over it. It was written in the 90s, so like the descriptions and the depictions of women and characters in general were much. They were terrible. And I was a lot younger, so my story writing wasn't as great. So I worked on it. I started writing and illustrating and changing things, and eventually they stopped bugging me and they said, "Okay, we're going to publish it." And I was like, "Oh my God, I got nothing." So I then started work on it, and they gave me an editor, and then she hit me over the head with like a 2x4 and said, "You got to get working." So I really crunched down and worked on it for like the past like before it was published, like 6-7 months or something like that, and that was basically all I did. And then I finished. I got the story I wanted to tell. Made it to me, it covered a lot of ground for me as a writer and as an Indigenous person. As a Scoop survivor, I get to talk about all that stuff and showcase the language and our culture in an urban setting and a futuristic urban setting, and kind of like a wish fulfillment for Native people, where in Salamander, the Curling Key universe, all Indigenous people from around the world, they come together and they're space pirates, and they're the new 1%. So that's my work. I have a couple projects coming up. One's about water protectors, and the other one's about werewolves. So not heavy subjects. Yay.
Thank you so much for that. So I'm already starting to see some commonality and some differences between the kind of work that you're doing and what Tasha was talking about. But I'm hoping Natasha is back and able to join in the conversation. Oh, there you are. Hi again.
Yeah, hold on. I'm just going to ask her to unmute. Give me just 1 second.
Okay. Technology is grand, isn't it? It's bringing us all together, but we just have to work out these little hurdles here.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hooray.
Okay. Great.
So nice to hear your voice finally and to see you.
Yeah. Apologies. I'm in a rural area also, and there's no Wi-Fi out in the valley, so I was attempting to connect over my hotspot, and that was a mistake.
That's okay. We're just happy to have you here and to hear from you now about your work, the projects you've worked on, what brought you to graphic novels and illustrating that you do, what you're trying to do with your work. And I'm really curious about the experience with DC as well.
yeah, I want to quickly clarify something about my intro there, which is just that I am Métis. My mom is Métis. My dad is white. My Métis family are from Meadow Lake, Saskatchewan, and Calgary and Northwest Territories, but I mainly grew up in Vancouver. So I'm kind of hyper aware of how the Métis identity has been misused on occasion. So I just want to be clear about the perspective that I'm bringing.
Miigwech, thank you for that. That's important. Okay, she's muted again.
You're muted again. Oh, you won't be able to unmute yourself. Hold on. Yeah, hold on. Just give me a second. Okay, there you go.
Okay.
Sorry. Oh boy. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good.
I was saying I got started as an illustrator kind of by accident. I have always I've been drawing for most of my life, but it was never something that felt like it was going to be realistic as a career. So I was working in academic publishing, and I started a little Squarespace website just for fun. And at the time I've always been really obsessed with drawing decaying salmon. That's really interesting to me for whatever reason. And I got connected through Highwater Press with Brett Hewson, who we started work on our first children's book together, which was called The Sockeye Mother. And since then that has sort of blossomed into a pretty grand project that will eventually be a series of 10 books. After I finished that, Highwater Press contacted me about working with Tasha on Surviving the City, which was just really exciting, something I'd always dreamed of and very daunting, and involved a lot of really basic Google searches about like, how do I make border panels in Photoshop? Because Tasha and I come from very different life experiences, I saw my role as an illustrator as first and foremost a listener, as someone who was working to understand and hear Tasha's story as fully as possible, and then just trying to add a visual dimension to that. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say.
So I was really curious about your work with DC, because while we're having a panel with some of the people who have done work with Marvel, in this panel it's mostly focusing on some of the more independent and smaller presses and the work that's being done there. But you have that dual perspective after having worked with, within that kind of environment, which I imagine is pretty different from your experience with Highwater and elsewhere.
Yeah, it was very different. I was working on a story that was written by Tracy Sorrell, who I think she might be here. And I think her and I both remarked in emailing each other over the course of bringing this story to life that the experience of working with DC was, they're very, very organized. They've got a lot of people at every stage of the process. It felt like, whoa, all of a sudden we're like in the big leagues. It was pretty overwhelming at times.
Did you find that within that you were able, the two of you, based on your conversations, were able to do the story in a way that felt like you had control of that narrative, and you were able to present that story in a way that felt real and meaningful to you?
Yeah, I think, at least from my perspective, I won't speak for Tracy, but it seemed like we had a good amount of control over the outcome of the story. It was just on the publicity side, we got a little surprised by the process for when we're allowed to do interviews and that sort of thing.
Oh, okay. So that was kind of controlled by their PR department or
Yeah.
what have you. Okay, interesting. So I'm going to just ask some questions of all of you, and any of you can come in, but I have a specific question. Actually, this is a question from one of my students. He says he's really intrigued and terrified by your drawings of Wendigos in red clouds, and that this is the first time he had seen a Wendigo portrayed actually by an Indigenous person, because as we know, there's all kinds of images out there. And he was also very intrigued by how you portrayed spirits in the spirit world in Surviving the City. And he's wondering what narratives you based your illustrations off. How did you come up with that way of portraying them?
All of those sorts of decisions are made with a huge amount of conversation with mainly with the author, but also with the editor. So for the Wendigo, that was Jen Storm's her vision, and she did she provided like some sort of sketches, and she tried to add in verbal description of what she was seeing in her mind. We just went back and forth and tried to we just did that with I provided a bunch of character sketches, and we worked until we got what was in her head out onto paper. And it was the Tasha. I'm really I think it's really important as someone who is just an illustrator and not an author illustrator to just like the most important part of my job is trying to see what is inside of the author's head.
Thank you. That's so interesting because I worked with Jen on my story in this place, but she worked with me as an illustrator. So she had the opposite experience of trying to take what was in my head and put it on in the illustrations. So yeah, I think that part of just really listening and trying to understand is so important, especially when we're portraying those kinds of spiritual aspects of our stories, which I find so often is portrayed within Indigenous graphic novels and comics. I'm not so sure, maybe I'm just not as avid a comic and graphic novel reader, but I'm not as sure that I see that portrayed so much in other graphic novels and comics that I read. So I'd like to know if either Tasha or Neal would like to comment on that at all.
Hi, I'm here. I'm just feeding my dog, so I'm camera off. So I just want to also acknowledge that this is the first time Natasha and I have ever shared any type of space. So it's so good to hear her voice and see her and hear, it's kind of interesting to hear. This is my first time hearing her process on our books. So I'm so glad to be in this space with her. About the entities that Natasha and I have created in terms of the evil entity and the grandmother spirits. To me, that actually came in a dream that I had about an elder that had passed on. And in my dream, he was kind of like a jokester kind of guy. And in my dream, he came and he said, he was laughing and he said, "Tasha, don't you know when people pass on, they're all around us?" And in a very echoey voice, he said, "I'm over here." And I could hear his voice booming around me. And then in a split second, he said, "And I'm right here." And I could hear him whispering right next to my ear. And so that's where those characters, those figures in the series came from. I wanted to show, the ever presence of our ancestors, but also, you know, give physical form to the forces that we know hurt us, and to show the duality for people. And I think Natasha just did such a fantastic job in both 1 and 2, and in 3 coming, at putting those things on page for the reader. So I thank her for that.
Did you have something to add as well, Neal?
About including spirits in graphic novels?
Well, I know that you were interested in just how important it is for Indigenous comic artists and graphic novel creators to be in control of that narrative and to be able to portray all aspects of our stories in a way that we have control over. And, you know, so I thought perhaps you might want to speak to this, but maybe indirectly to this.
Okay. Well, I'll talk about spirits first. Because like in the Prisoner of Haiku, he talked about spirits, and so I showed them like in the snowstorm. There's like a spirit that shows in the background of the snowstorm. So, and in another graphic novel that I'm working with, a native research project out of University of Ottawa, I also talk about the spirits and also show them, or I show them in like our everyday lives, as well as like you'd see them in a sweat lodge. So I've shown like, you know, the ribs of the sweat lodge, and then beyond that, like the universe and a spirit sitting with you in the sweat lodge. So there's the person in the lodge, and they look, you know, realistic, and then the spirit is like an energy type being sitting beside them. And I've shown like spirits like as being, you know, sometimes you see like an animal, and that could be a spirit of somebody that you know or something. So I try to show them in ways that I've been taught as from elders that, you know, this is what they are. I think in the sound.
Sorry, very present in our lives, but and that's being reflected in those graphic narratives as well.
Yeah, like in DC and Marvel, when they come at it from a superhero point of view, so the spirits are like, you know, usually like, and they're always animals. They're never anything else really, and they're always usually like a bear or a wolf, or that's about it really, or an eagle. So like if you're an Apache, it's generally an eagle showing up, and if you're from the north, it's going to be a polar bear. That's annoying. Or seeing, you know, like Indigenous characters in again DC and Marvel, or even like Image, or their powers are always based around, you know, the natural world, and it's always based around, you know, stereotypical Indigenous ideas, and they always have their costumes are like updated forms of like the buckskin and like leather boots and stuff like that, right? And that's annoying, to say the least. And I because we're like our people were more than that, you know. I mean, we've evolved since then. We have a much different fashion sense than just, you know, what we were portrayed as, and then that brings us back to like, you know, how we're portrayed and how we've been portrayed for 500 plus years. It's not been by Indigenous people. Like you can, I use this example of there's a jacket in one of the museums in Canada, and it's this it's like a leather jacket, but it's got like beadings, quill work on it, and it's like an intricate design. I'm sure all the beads and the quill work has some kind of meaning to the artist or the person that crafted it, but it's not, you know, tan. It's got color, it's got designs, and it has this, you know, this fashion sense, and it stands the test of time. Like it's over 120 years old. This jacket, it's still going. You probably still put it on. So the idea that, you know, Indigenous people, all we wore was tan leather, you know, pants, tan, you know, leather vest, and the women all wore these big long tan, high dresses and with some fringe, is bunk. Like that's baloney, And then it's like none of that makes sense towards the way our women are depicted. It comes from a very patriarchal, colonizer point of view, where women they raised the kids, they looked after the family, they cooked, and you'd see in like Dances with Wolves, they put on the backpack and they carry like the village away, and the men just walk off, on their own, and they're like got their spears and their bows and they're hunting. That makes no sense to me as an Indigenous person, because I know that we come from predominantly. There's my wife and kid. They just came back from outside where it's raining. But like we come from predominantly matriarchal societies. Not every single Indigenous community or tribe is matriarchal, but for the most part across Turtle Island and the southern and southern Americas, we're matriarchal people. We had hunters, we had warriors, we had chiefs, we had leaders who were women. And when women spoke, the whole tribe listens. There's a philosophical tenet now that is mentioned as I think I'm gonna mess it up, but it's something like our people aren't defeated until the last woman lays down and it gives up. But that's us. We take our leadership tones from a woman, so that has to come across, or that hasn't come across in any portrayal of Indigenous people since colonizers showed up. And as Indigenous people, we need to control that narrative. We need to show that we have, like, I'm one dude on this panel, right? Like, I'm one Native guy on the panel. I'm the only one here. So like Native women, they have this massive voice in our communities. And that needs to come out across, and that needs to be shown in, our art form. So as a graphic novelist, I try to make sure that, women in general, but especially Indigenous women, are always shown as the powerful beings that I've been raised to view them as. Yeah. So like it's reinventing, it's re-educating, the general mainstream audience of what our history is, of what our people are, what are as cultural beings, as creative beings, because we're not beads and buckstings. We're not like Norval Morrisell, where he has the one woodland style, right? He coined that. So that now we're more than that. We're more than like our art form is more than what it's seen. And I think as an artist, it's my responsibility, and it's our responsibility to show off, just how amazingly rich and vibrant our artistic community is. I think I might have babbled a bit there. Sorry. Oh, and I guess the last thing I want to say is that because we've been portrayed negatively and by pretty much any non-Indigenous media, we need to show ourselves as being beautiful. We need to show ourselves as being proud and grand role models. Not just regular good role models, but grand role models. And why can't we do that? Because that's seen in every other aspect of media for anybody. Like you see in the movies, like they've got like Jet Li, they've got Jackie Chan, they've got Denzel Washington. They all play these like amazing heroes that are like just awesome. And that goes to saying, without saying, to like white media, they're superheroes. They're big, they're massive, and they have no limits. Why can't we should be doing that for ourselves? We should be insisting that our heroes also have no limits. Our heroes are also powerful, and our heroes can also shape the world.
Indeed. Yeah, I think the whole concept of what constitutes a hero is perhaps really different when we look at Indigenous literature in general, but particularly when we're looking at comics and graphic novels, where that's such a predominant form. I think it's in the kinds of projects like that Natasha worked on, the Wonderful Women project with DC, but also, you know, Tasha, I think are you still there? If I can pull you back into this conversation, is she there?
Yeah, I'm here.
There
I
you
just I have about 5 minutes before pure baby meltdown.
Yes, yeah. So I wanted to bring you back into this because I think, you know, what we see as heroic within our communities is often quite different than that whole idea of this superhero, this model kind of figure. Well, where there's room for that, but I think in Surviving the City, there's a very heroic way of interpreting that as well. And so I'm interested in your thoughts on that. And also, I'm very interested in your land-based learning approaches that you use as an educator and that you've been studying, and whether you see all of those things reflected in your way of approaching graphic novels. I was hoping to hear on both those things from you, if possible.
So we'll see how far I get.
Okay.
I'll start off with the land-based thing. So for me, it's really important to use my more creative writing as knowledge mobilization for my academic work, because I bet there'll be like 4 people, maybe 5, like who will read my dissertation at the end of the day, and most of them will be on my PhD committee. And so it's really important to me to make sure that all that's shared, all the knowledge that comes through that dissertation gets to our community. And so if I can embed it in places in graphic novels or other writings, that's what I am committed to do. And so for sure in volume 2, especially with the challenging of traditional protocols around ceremony, I think that we see pieces of my academic work in there. So my dissertation is based on gender and land-based education. And so the second graphic novel definitely shows seeds of my academic work. So obviously my daughter has had enough.
She has a lot to say about this.
She has a lot to say, so I'm gonna sign off, and oh, her dad's gonna come get her. There you go. Bye.
Bye-bye. Aw. I could talk to her all day too. But,
yeah, she's quite a vocal little girl.
She is.
So, and in
Wonderful.
terms of heroes, I think that I like, you know, my mom really like kind of like focused on us understanding that greatness doesn't exist in one individual in terms of our people, of our nations, that there's greatness in each and every one of us. And I think that really comes through in my characters. It was important for me that there wasn't a singular idol hero, that each character had their own gifts celebrated at different parts of the book. And I think that goes a long way for young people too. And it kind of works against, like those Riverdale type series where, there is the character, the pinnacle. I wanted young people to say, like, to see and find and be encouraged to find their own gifts and hope that those gifts can be celebrated. And so, writing the graphic novel series, because of course, like I'm doing my PhD and writing. Somebody asked me yesterday, do those things kind of conflict? And the honest answer is I need both of those things, because if I were just doing my dissertation, I would be a very miserable person, I believe. I need that creative avenue. I need that piece to be able to have more direct contact with our community than just the dissertation. I have a fantastic committee, and I have had a really good academic experience, but it is limited. Our reach as academics is sometimes very limited. And so I appreciate having those two avenues for myself personally.
When you're speaking, it reminds me of the esteemed writer and scholar, the late Basil Johnson, spoke about the land as a book, that we receive our knowledge and our understandings through our observations of the natural world and the land around us. And so what you're saying really really resonates for me. I wanted to also, because I know Natasha, I think you have to go soon, but I wanted to ask you, somebody had a question for you about, apparently you're working on a graphic novel with Thomas King based on his short story Borders. Is that something we can look forward to soon?
Yeah, if I manage to finish it ever. It's really interesting project for me as someone who is dealing with my own immigration nonsense and has been for several years now. Yeah, the short story is one that I really loved in high school, which was really exciting to see that proposal show up in my inbox. And
is there a publisher for that?
Yeah, it's with HarperCollins in Canada and Little Brown in the US.
And if I'm understanding, you probably have to leave soon. So before you go, I just have some other things that I was hoping to speak with you about. In terms of your work and future directions, what are you hoping? Like, what would be your some of your ideal projects that you would like to work on as an illustrator? What are your kind of hopes for how Indigenous graphic novels and comics are evolving? Because I think we're starting to see a huge explosion of interest and different kinds of graphic novels and different kinds of stories being put in this kind of narrative, illustrated narrative type of form.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not picky. I think personally, I think that graphic novels are just a really exciting form of storytelling. They're not just like books light. They bring their own special experience to the table, and picture books too, of course. So I don't know. I'm just kind of excited for the huge diversity of stories that are emerging, and I'm happy to play whatever role makes sense, and yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I'm not sure if it's my internet that's a problem, but I have, while I have you both here, I'm wondering about the benefits of working on these independent projects with smaller publishers versus what you would do with within, you know, some of the there's pros and cons to working with some of the bigger publishers on projects. What sort of freedoms or control do you think there is in working with smaller publishers as an Indigenous artist, of course?
Oh, I think, sorry, Tasha, if you want to go ahead, go first.
Oh, yeah, I have to go in like one minute or so, but I'll just I that level of intimacy that happens with the work. You work really closely with the author and with the editor, and around that time.
Yeah, sorry, Natasha. I think we're just having a bit of a connection problem.
I think in that way, it's I don't.
Okay, sorry that we had some connection issues, but I know you have to go, Natasha. I really appreciate you being here, and I thank you for persisting through those those technical issues. Really, really just wonderful to speak with you and to provide an opportunity for you and Tasha to have some time to talk about the process of working together collaboratively on the Surviving the City series of books. So Chimigwech, thank you so much. And I understand that if you have to go. So maybe I'll turn it over to you again, Neal, to talk about that idea of how you perceive the benefits of working with a smaller publisher like Kegedonce Press and some of the other ones that you've worked with. I'm not sure who published Sovereign Traces or if it was independently published, but what's your take on that?
Well, Sovereign Traces was at a University of Michigan, I believe it was called. And they just basically gave me like I only had to work with the author, so and he was just like, whatever you want to draw, whatever you want to do, just do it. I trust you completely. So that was very that was nerve-wracking. It was also really, really freeing and liberating.
Sorry, was that Gordon Henry?
Yeah. So I think with Lorimar, they had more. They wanted more artistic control, so that was frustrating. And they wanted to like edit, change stuff so much that it was just it made the process of creating the art much more difficult. So like the use of red in the book, they wanted every panel and every page to have some kind of red in it. And I had to argue with them for a bit to explain, if you're going to saturate the book with red, you're going to lose the punch at the end where the red dress is shown. If you want to put it red here and here and use it sparingly, but use it to effect, it's going to make it's going to make the artwork stand out more. It's going to make the use of the red stand out more, and it's going to bring home the message of the red dress. So that was rough. And then sometimes I'd send in the artwork, and they would have their editors or art people remove stuff and change it. That was also very, very frustrating. With Kegedonce, they were pretty hands off, relying on me to do the writing and the illustration pretty much on my own. And then when you introduced me to the editor, I was under the impression that the editor would come in and would tell you change this, and that was like you had to do it. So she asked me to change these 2 pages where I was describing the history of the world from like present day to 2242, which is when the book takes place. And I said, oh, okay, I can do that. But then into my head, I'm thinking, I've got like 20 pages of artwork I've got to fill in to make this all make sense. And then when I got to that point, I was like, I got another 20 pages of artwork just to explain how we got there. So I said, okay. And then I did it. I did all the pencils, center the pencils. She's like, oh, this is great. And it wasn't until after I was finished the whole book and we finished the editing process that she told me, like, I'm amazed that you basically took all my edits and you went with it. And, you know, I just want to make sure that, you know, you're okay with this as your vision. And I was like, yeah, this is, you know, exactly what I was trying to go for. You know, I'm like, you really helped me focus on it. And she said, you know, I said, you know, I thought as the editor, I had to do what you told me to do, because I've never worked with an editor before. And she said, no, these were just suggestions. And I was just like, oh my God. I was like 2 months worth of work at one point where I was adding these pages, but I don't have any regrets with that. I know that with like DC and Marvel, I would be the penciler or I'd be the inker, most likely the penciler, and then somebody would come along and do the inks, and then somebody would come along and do the coloring, the letters, and even like layout design. You know, I wouldn't have complete control of how I wanted stuff to be. And there are as a penciler, you know, sometimes I draw stuff and I come in with the inks and I change it and I add more details where I wouldn't have been able to if I was just a penciler. So I don't work that great when it comes to that kind of interference. Like if somebody else, if I'm doing the whole thing, awesome. I'm very happy and I create my best work. If I'm just doing like the pencils and somebody else is doing the other things, I'm not as happy. And then I find that it becomes like a chore. It's not like a work where, you know, I'm passionate about it. It becomes like a chore. If that makes any sense. So hopefully I won't get picked up by Marvel and DC. I'll be able to stick with you know, people that are able to support my dream the way I have been. So I think I've been lucky.
So that would be your preference as you move forward with your writing, is to work with smaller presses, Indigenous presses, who maybe would, you know, provide more autonomy in what you're doing and perhaps better understand what your work. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that kind of what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
And you're, it's interesting, that's not the normal editing process. Usually we talk to both sides to make sure that they understand that. Oh, babies everywhere during this session. Ani, hi.
My 16-month-old daughter. Her name's Adizuke Ekwe. That means she tells a sacred story. So she already talks a lot when she tells stories. So hopefully that happens. But to answer your question, yeah, I hope to continue working with smaller publishers. Like there's, I guess there would be like a broader reach in a sense. More books would be put out for like Marvel and DC, but I don't like the aspect of losing the control, and I don't like. I think there would be a lot more arguments with DC and Marvel, and how Native characters are portrayed, and how I don't want to have to continually educate them on you know, our culture and our traditions and how everything isn't a pan-Indigenous thing, right? And that's how they create their stuff, and that's how they market their stuff. Is you know, like there's an alpha flight in Marvel. Shaman that's his character's name, and he represents, you know, basically all the Indigenous people in Canada. That's super annoying. I don't want to have those kind of arguments where I gotta every day, you know, explain something to them. It's not that I don't want to educate people about us. I think, well, I do want to educate people about us. I just don't think it has to be part of the creative process. I think I can educate people through the artwork and through the stories, and that's what working with like Kegedonce and James Lomar and these other people I've worked with. You know, that's the freedom that I get.
Right. So although Tasha and Natasha have had to tend to some family things, responsibilities, I did notice that there were some kinds of recurring things in the work that you're all doing. not only in terms of issues such as missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, residential schools, and so on, but beyond that, there was the idea of the strength within Indigenous culture, language, our ceremonies. And I know that that those aspects of Curly and Key were very important to you. Can you comment on the inclusion of them, and if you felt, what were your responsibilities in terms of portraying those aspects of your culture and your story?
Well, like I live in Ottawa, and I'm an urban Indian. I try to follow the traditional ways of well, not all of them, right? Because I've got, I'm also goth, so I dress that and I listen to that. But as an urban Indigenous person, I try to follow our spiritual beliefs. So, sometimes, not every morning, but sometimes in the morning I'll wake up and I'll smudge. If, Addie has a nightmare or I have a nightmare, I smudge. If my wife and I are having emotions, we smudge. If we're watching TV or we're reading a book and there's some emotions going on, we smudge. I'm not a pipe carrier, so I don't have a pipe ceremony or anything like that. I carry tobacco with me everywhere I go in ties. Addie, I have tobacco for Addie that she carries. I guess I carry for her because she doesn't carry her bag and stuff, right? But so putting all that stuff into the graphic novel, I think the responsibility I had to start with was to show that Salamander was Nakawa. He's part of the Soto people. So the teaching he's going to share are going to come from there, right? And I'm Soto. I don't want to write about being Mohawk or Iroquois. I don't want to write about being from the Sioux, because I'm not. And I would have to do a lot of research and talk to actual people who are from the Sioux tribe to get their spiritual beliefs in there. And then in further volumes, I'm going to be doing some similar stuff to that, right? But I think there's the responsibilities to show the teachings that I have and reflect those through Salamander. So he has a medicine bundle, and he talks about his medicine bundle changing throughout his life. He has a really, really long life, right? So he's 300 years old. So his bundle changes, and it's important also to mention that the gifts you get from from people to include your bundle, they're with you for as long as you need to, and then somebody will come along and you'll give those parts of your bundle to them, because that's where it needs, or that's where it's needed. So I need to show that kind of stuff, right? So I show him smudging, but I don't really talk about why he smudges or the ceremony of smudging. I just show that he's doing it, so it's integrated in a natural way into his life, because that's what we do. Yeah, I think for the language, again, I wanted to integrate it into his life, so it's in his everyday speech, and it's a natural part of him, without any explanation of what the words mean, because non-Indigenous people, when they talk about other people's culture, or if another culture or another person or a different culture, they reflect on theirs, or they show they don't explain in massive amounts of detail what they're doing. They just mention that this is a cultural aspect of their life, and it flows into the character and the story, and it feels natural. And for too long, we've been asked to explain our culture every single time it comes up by non-Indigenous media. I was at the Wayfield Writers Festival, and it came up not only for me when I was on the panel, but also for other Indigenous people when they're on a different panel. They were always asked, "Well, can you explain this?" And in this day and age, you have Google. If I want to, it should be enough that I say, this is my medicine bundle, and this is and you can see it, and then you can type in Google medicine bundle, Soto people, and then it should come up a little description. because I don't think we owe anybody an explanation of why our culture's in a book, or
Right.
I think we need to be respectful of what we show. So like I can talk about the sweat lodge, but I can't really show the process of what's going on in the sweat lodge, or any specific details about what happened in a particular lodge that I was involved in, because that wouldn't be right. That's not what what goes on in the lodge stays in the lodge, kind of thing.
So does your audience shape the way you create and imagine your work? And this is a question from the audience. And how can Indigenous and non-Indigenous educators teach your work?
Not so much for the Kagalgae. Kagalgae, that's basically just, that's my baby, and I don't.
Did you have an audience in mind when you were creating it?
Yeah, like, well, when I was creating, I thought it would just be like a youth, people that read comic books like Superman, Spider-Man, that kind of stuff. And then later on, it just became more in my head like a sci-fi story. So it'd be more like teenagers and young adults and adults that read sci-fi with like a superhero element. And then at some point, I just stopped thinking about the audience, and I wanted to tell the story that I wanted to tell, because it's been with me my whole life. So Kagalgae is more on that vein. Prisoner of Haiku, Highwater, and Medicine Road. Those were all stories that I was asked to do by somebody else, and they had a specific audience involved. And for those, yeah, I totally thought about my audience and what I wanted to portray to them, and how I wanted to portray it to them. And I guess I wanted them to ask a certain amount of questions, or certain questions, as they read the story. So I was very careful in how I portrayed and showed culture and our traditions, because I wanted like that to be a story element of teaching. So more often than not, I mentioned tobacco, and I mentioned that it's one of four medicines, four of the sacred medicines for my people and for other Indigenous people in Canada. But I mentioned that, and then I may or may not explain it more, but I've given you the four sacred medicines, and I've told you which one's first, and I told you that here's a tobacco tie, and this is, if you want more information, you can give this to somebody, and I would explain stuff like that. What was the other part? Was how did people get educated on it?
No, yes. How can Indigenous and non-Indigenous educators teach your work?
Wait, I've been asked a couple of times to speak to classes about my work as a graphic novelist. So you can contact me and ask me, and then I'll we can figure out how I can help you teach about it. I think I want to say Google, because it's a really useful thing, but for non-Indigenous people, I think you should talk to an Indigenous person. You need to go like learn about tobacco, learn that how to make a tobacco tie, which is on YouTube. You can figure out how to do it, and there's people that will teach you that. And then go seek out an Indigenous person. Say, hey, I want to learn more about these traditions. I want to learn about this story or this kind of stuff, and make the offering in a good way.
I think it's important for educators to have frameworks within which they can understand Indigenous literature, including graphic novels. So, works like Why Indigenous Literatures Matter by Daniel Heath Justice, Concepts Around Survivance by Gerald Bisner, and some of his work provide a context for readers to start to do that work, to understand Indigenous literatures and to start to learn how to read and understand them. We do have another question that's come in. It's, can you talk about your early influences and your favorite comics and works today? and they would also like to know what your inspiration is.
Okay. So originally, my adopted father introduced me to Savage Sword of Conan, just this black and white old magazine, as a way of just sharing stories, because I like to doodle. So when I started, Savage Sword of Conan was where I got my start loving comic books, and then that grew into like the X-Men, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Alpha Flight. But I was always looking for like native characters, and there weren't really many native characters when I started out. But as a member of the 60s Scoop, I was adopted into a white family at a very early age. So my influences in my early comic books were like Greek mythology, and like Western, cowboys kind of stuff. And then like TV shows like Miami Vice, and kind of age myself, but yeah, so stuff like that. And then when I reached out and found my birth parents, and I found my people, my inspirations definitely changed. So I read out as much as I could, and on Native people, on our people, which unfortunately at the time was predominantly from a colonizer point of view. So it was very hard to find stuff that was written from an indigenous lens. And then later on, sorry. And now my inspiration has gone from like early indigenous leaders, where I learned about Tecumseh, and his awesome prowess as a warrior and a leader, where he like defeated this fort of like 300 soldiers in one night. I thought that was amazing. To like Standing Rock, what's happened to the Wet'suwet'en, what happened at Oka, all those kinds of things. Those are things that I find pretty inspiring now, and they show that as people, when we come together, there's a lot that we can accomplish, and we're vastly more strong than we are on our own, and that we can definitely change our world as well as the world around us. And that's my inspiration these days.
And what are some of your favorite comics now that there are more indigenous people writing comics and graphic novels? What are you reading, and what do you love right now?
Well, I just started a series called Echo. I think it's Echo. It's on a bookshelf behind
Katharina
me.
Vermet's.
Yeah, it's about a young girl, a young Métis girl who like has visions, I think, where she goes back in time and she like relives certain elements, and then she learns about her culture and her people like that. I thought that was really awesome. There was also Kagalgae the Raven. He's by Jay Ojik. He has like a animated cartoon. I think that's awesome. And it's like I think the first one that was all indigenous, and a serial comic or a cartoon. So that's awesome. The recent movie, which was super surprising but also amazing, was the New Mutants. It's just about kids who find their mutant powers for the first time, and it's by Marvel. But the movie is a native story. It stars Danielle Moonstar, and she's native, and the story is all about her native identity and native mythology, wrapped in this superhero element. And as an indigenous person, I think that's freaking brilliant. And mainstream audiences loved it, and they watched it, and yeah.
It's interesting you bring that up, because one of the comments or questions that we got was whether you had ever considered animation work, because this person would love to see an indigenous X-Man show.
I have thought about being an animator, but I don't have the patience to keep drawing sequential art. Yeah, it's a whole different skill set and a whole different way of looking at your art. I have I would love to see the Krillin Key in a big, in a movie like Zack Snyder's Justice League. I like to see that, Krillin Key up there. As an animation, if it was done in the style of my artwork, great. I'd totally be down for that. But I haven't. I'm not an animator. That's not my skill set. Yeah.
Have you seen any of the work of Cole Paul's? He has a new graphic novel coming out that you might find interesting. It's called Pizza Punks.
Pizza Punks?
Yeah, it's published by Conundrum Press, and Cole is Indigenous himself. He's been creating comics since he was a teenager, I believe. And so this is his second. Really, it's based on Pizza Punks. He started it years ago. And so it's kind of a collected works of his comics, of his Pizza Punks comics. So I'm really interested to see that one. In his first collection, he focused a lot on the Indigenous language. So I think it's really interesting what people are starting to do and being able to explore and getting those spaces and opportunities to be able to do that more and more, both through various kinds of self-publishing, working with smaller publishers, and so on. And I know that my colleague Sean has been doing some work around creating spaces for Indigenous creators. So before we wrap up, maybe Sean, did you want to just fill us in a little bit on what you're doing?
Yeah, thanks so much. This has been such a wonderful session, and I think the through lines between our opening plenary, David Alexander Robertson's work, and some of the independent stuff that's been showcased in this panel in particular is really interesting, because you see how opportunities then build outwards, right? That there are a lot of opportunities. I was thinking about Tasha, who was approached, and then now she's potentially working with Disney, and you see how the opportunity to have space in a medium that historically was very white and very male. I get to say that as the bald white guy as part of the day today. You see how opportunities in publishing then create space and gives people to amplify their own stories. And I think a lot of the work that I do in the graphic medium is not necessarily Indigenous focused. It's more, I do work in graphic history, but I have had the opportunity to work with a number of more independent Indigenous comics creators, people like Gord Hill, Leanne Charlie, Tanya Willard, and some of the work that I see is that there's a lot that the publishing world can do to make space and amplify voices and create opportunities. And I think, Neal, like listening to you for this session has really shown me what's important to me, I guess, why that's so important to do. And you were kind of saying, how you approach your stories is different than how other people would perhaps approach them. And I think that's the uniqueness about comics, is that whether it's Neal or Natasha or Tasha, there's opportunities, I think, for people to get involved in the medium in different ways, to create different kinds of stories. And then you can start, having different kinds of audiences being connected to the medium of comics. So I've really, really appreciated, Kateri, what you've created here, because it's a really fruitful conversation, I think.
I feel like the time is short. There's so much more that we could talk about in terms of Indigenous comics and how working with smaller publishers and in those smaller spaces allows us to explore so many things and to maintain that control that is so important over the narratives and the imagery that's being put out. Neal, when you were talking about the kinds of outfits and things that these pseudo-Indigenous characters were wearing in some of the comics from non-Indigenous sources. It's so important to kind of to just go off and do our own thing. We don't always have to speak against colonialism, but every time we speak, it kind of erases some of that. I think it helps to do that, even if we don't address it directly. So before we go, we've got a minute. I want to do a giveaway from Kegedonce, from Kegedonce Press. So we're interested in sending somebody a copy of Neal's Krillian Key, the first volume. So the way that you'll win is this. So it'll be the first person who can message Sean. They can all message you, right, Sean?
That's correct.
Okay. So if you can, the first one who can message Sean with the name of the title of the volume for this volume of Krillian Key. We mentioned it a couple of times throughout. So, and as Neal says, Google is your friend.
Okay, congrats to Charles. He was fast on the button, and I'll work with Charles and get his contact information and pass it along.
Wonderful. Okay, so thank you so much, Neal. Everyone else, you can find Krillian Key Volume 1 Salmon Run through Kegedonce Press. If you don't happen to win a copy today, it's available, and just a wonderful piece of work from Neal. We did have another question. Maybe we can just really quickly address that, and then we're going to close it up. This person is just wondering, Neal, if you have any recommendations for Discords or Facebook groups or other networks to connect for Indigenous artists to connect with one another for support, mentorship, and bringing awareness of each other. Any Indigenous comic artists or illustrators kinds of groups that you know of?
I think there's one called Survivance on Facebook, run by Elizabeth LaPonce. And then she's a really great resource for Indigenous artists in graphic novels and stuff. Other than that, I don't like. There's just like general comic book groups that you can join for advice. There's indie comic books on Facebook as well for groups, and they'll offer all kinds of different advice. But Indigenous specific groups, I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up myself.
Okay. Okay, well, that's one place where you can look. Thank you for that question. I just want to say a big thank you, Chimigwech, to Natasha, Donnovan, and Tasha Spillet for spending so much time with us in their very busy days, carving out that piece of time. And thank you so much, Neal, for spending the hour with us, or no, hour and a half with us, plus a few minutes. Thanks to Patricia Campbell, who's here from Kegedonce Press, for that giveaway, and to my co-coordinators of this symposium and this panel. So Chimigwech to all of you, everyone who came for this session, I thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the panels. We've got another one coming up focusing on some of the Indigenous creators who worked with Marvel on their recent Indigenous Voices volume, which should be really interesting. And don't forget, this evening, we're going to be focusing on This Place 150 Years Retold with numerous creators from that anthology as well. So take good care, and hopefully we'll see you in the next sessions as well. Chimigwech, everyone.
We want to thanks so much to what a great panel, and as you can see, I've moved locations. I'm now over in on my kitchen table here, and my cat is going crazy. So anyways, so thanks to Neal, Tasha, Natasha. Thanks to Kateri for hosting. And as always, thanks to Lucas and Sean for handling it. I had to run and teach my class, and so I'm going to watch the recording, which, speaking of, all the recordings now, because we've had some technical difficulties uploading this to Facebook, what we did is we recorded, and we're recording this session. In fact, you can probably turn the recording off now. So the